The Audi Q5 has been one of the best-selling premium SUVs in the world ever since it was launched back in 2008. Audi's built well over 1.5 million examples. Now we've come to the searing hot Baja California in Mexico to drive the second generation of the Q5. It's a slightly longer car than before, and it switches to a new platform called MLB Evo. You might think that the Q5 is closely linked to the A4, and in many ways you'd be right, but its closest relative is actually Audi's largest SUV, the Q7. The car will launch in the United Kingdom next January with a couple of four-cylinder engines. There's a turbocharged petrol which puts out 248 brake horsepower and 370 newton meters, but the bigger seller will be the diesel, which has 188 brake horsepower and 400 newton meters. Then soon after launch there'll be this car, which is the 3-litre V6 diesel. That has 282 brake horsepower and 620 newton meters of torque. The four-cylinder units, they get a 7-speed dual-clutch transmission and Audi's latest Quattro Ultra four-wheel drive system, which disconnects the rear wheels wherever possible in a bid to save fuel. The V6 diesel, that gets an 8-speed torque converter automatic and full-time Quattro. That's because one of the options on this engine is a sports differential, and Audi hasn't worked out a way yet of integrating that into the Quattro Ultra transmission. Audi doesn't have the four-cylinder diesel on this launch, but we've tried the four-cylinder petrol. It's a gutsy little thing. You have to work it pretty hard in a car of this size, but once you get it up to speed, it'll sit quite happily at 80 miles an hour. It spins up quite smoothly too, and it fades nicely into the background when you're at speed. That's the one engine, by the way, for which we do have a CO2 figure. It emits 154 grams per kilometre, which is pretty decent for a turbocharged petrol engine in a car of this size. It makes you wonder what Audi's going to do with the four-cylinder diesel and the six-cylinder diesel. We have tried the six-cylinder diesel. That's the car we're driving here. It's a really strong performer, as you might expect. Very accomplished cruiser. At about 80 miles an hour it's pulling 1750 RPM, and frankly you won't hear it. The roads here in Mexico have a pretty open texture like the one we're on just at the minute. You'll be much more troubled by road noise on the larger wheels than you will from anything coming from under the bonnet, or indeed the wing mirrors or the door seals, because they've done a pretty good job of suppression there as well. There are 4 possible chassis setups on the Q5. 2 of them mix conventional dampers and steel springs. One of those 2 is slightly stiffer and there's a stiffer anti-roll bar, and that's what you'll be offered if you go for S-line trim. Then there's the mix of conventional springs with adaptive dampers, and then the range topper, like our car, gets adaptive dampers and air suspension. On the road the Q5 feels generically Audi, but if that sounds negative, it's not meant to. It's pretty comfortable. We've been playing around with the Audi Drive Select functions today, and a good solution seems to be to keep it in dynamic mode on things like the air suspension, where it sits a little lower, just keeps body roll that little bit better in check. But even on the 20-inch wheels of this car, it's more than comfortable enough. Inside, the cabin will look pretty familiar if you've been anywhere near an A4 recently. Dashboard inherits a lot of that design. You've got the 8-inch screen in the middle, the MMI controls with the touchpad in the centre of the console, and Audi's virtual cockpit, which can replace all the instruments with a fully digital display. That's available here too. In the rear, well, I'm just over 6 foot and I can get in pretty comfortably. There's decent headroom and legroom. The C-pillar can make getting in and out a little bit tricky, but it's not such a problem. The rear seats can be moved fore and aft, and the seat back's angle can be adjusted to prioritise either rear cabin space or the boot. The boot is slightly larger than the old car. It goes between 550 litres and 610 litres, depending on what way you've got those rear seats configured. If you fold them down completely, there's 1550 litres in there. That's par for the class and pretty much enough for anybody's needs. The Q5 really is Audi by numbers, but hey, that's how they've always sold, in huge numbers, and I don't see anything in this vehicle that's going to stop that trend. Perhaps it's not quite as exciting to drive as a BMW X3, and it's definitely not as involving as a Porsche Macan, but Audi really has strengthened those areas that have appealed to so many Q5 customers over the years. The cabin's beautifully finished, it's extremely refined, and it's a very comfortable cruiser. The company says that it can build around 150,000 examples of this car at its factory in Mexico, but that it could extend that capacity if there was enough demand. Somehow I think that suspicion might just be proved correct. Click the video on the left for a track battle between the Audi R8 V10 Plus, the McLaren 570S and the Porsche 911 Turbo S, or on the right for a first drive of the Jaguar F-Pace. Click the play icon for our latest video and on our logo to subscribe.